Hi, and welcome to Now in Android, episode number 16. Let's get into this and see what happened in the last couple of weeks. First of all, AndroidX releases pretty much every time there's a bunch of releases. This time, there were a couple of stable releases, mostly bug fixes. So check out Navigation 2.2.2 and Preference 1.1.1 for those stable versions. There were a ton of like alpha and beta and RC releases. So check those out to see exactly what came out there. The two that I want to call out in particular are about animation, partly because I love animation, but also because it's sort of interesting, the history that resulted in these. So first of all, there's a backport of the Animator APIs into AndroidX. And you may be asking yourself, like, why did we do this? After all, the Animator APIs date way back to Honeycomb 3.0, and the View Property Animator stuff was 3.2. Like, all that stuff is way in history. Why do we need it in AndroidX, which doesn't even go back that far? It's because of the other library that came out, which is vector drawable-seekable. So what we wanted to do, what developers wanted us to do for years, was provide them the capability of programmatically setting the time of a vector drawable animation. So instead of just saying start and then it runs, what they wanted to do was actually pause it along the way, resume it, and even programmatically set the time, set the fraction of animation that it's going to go to, which is a great idea, but it depended upon platform capabilities that were not introduced until later. And so we really couldn't put it in AndroidX because it didn't have the platform capabilities to depend on. So what we needed to do was pull out all the Animator stuff into this unbundled library, along with all of the bug fixes and API enhancements that we've had over the years. And then vector drawable seekable could depend on those changes instead. So we released two of those. One of them is Core Animation 1.0.0, as well as vector drawable seekable 1.0.0. These are both alpha releases. On the other hand, they depend on long-term capabilities from the platform. So they're certainly not as new as some things that you may find in an alpha 1 state. But check those out. If you've been waiting for that capability, please try that out. We have also come out with lots of articles and videos along the way. First of all, in the data space, Murat Yener has released an article on the new database inspector. This is in Android Studio 4.1 Canary Level 6. So with this tool, you can see what's going on with your database. So if you're using SQLite directly or through Room, you can actually see what's going on with the data. You can do live updates in the tool, or you can also even make changes in the tool and see live updates in the app itself, especially if you're observing on that data using the Room APIs. We had another Kotlin vocabulary article posted by Megan Mehta, and this one is about operator overloading. So this is a capability that was not in the Java programming language, but is in the Kotlin programming language because it can be, right? This is a convenience that makes your code more readable for some cases where it's really easier to read code that is showing exactly what the operation is instead of calling a function. So for example, if you have 2 point objects, or if you have 2 matrix objects, it's kind of logical to be able to see in the code that you are adding these things together or multiplying them with the operators like add and multiply. So through operator overloading in Kotlin, you can use things like overloads of plus and minus and multiply or plus plus, or even access things like square brackets or comparison operators like less than or greater than. So the article goes into details on how the stuff works under the hood, as well as when to use it, as well as some cases where you don't want to use it. There was also an article on material design components and how to migrate your app to the latest, greatest stuff. So Nick Rout posted this article on the 1.1.0 material design components library, as well as lots of information on migrating. So if you are currently using the old design support library, the recommendation is to first migrate to MDC 1.0.0. That will get you up into the AndroidX world, and then migrate to 1.1.1. When you do migrate to, 1.1.0, when you do migrate to that, you'll get new features like dark theme, full material theming for things like color and typography, as well as shapes, and new widgets like the extended floating action button and the date picker, and lots of accessibility improvements and bug fixes along the way. There are tons of links in there to further resources, not just on migration, but also just material design components in general. And there's also a video version of the article embedded directly in that article. So check out all of that. and migrate your stuff. OneTap was an article posted by Sean McQuinlan about the new OneTap API for authenticating users. It turns out that a lot of users sort of drop off of apps at the point where they are being asked to authenticate either to sign in or to sign up for your services, because sometimes that can be a confusing, error-prone, and frustrating experience. So OneTap aims to make that easier and smoother for the users, and therefore retain more users in your application, which is probably what you want. So check out that article for information on that new API. In the LiveData space, Jose Alcerica posted another couple of screencasts on, it's actually a two-part video. Part one is one-shot operations that shows how to use the LiveData coroutine builder, which is an extension function or a set of extension functions in KTX, to save on a bunch of boilerplate code for doing the things that you want to do anyway. Part two builds on that same capability and then shows how to use switch map for passing parameters with live and dynamic data that's going to be updated. There was also a bunch of sample code posted. First of all, on the location side, we've made a bunch of changes to location in the last few releases, specifically around user privacy and sharing of user data, and making it clear when the user's location is being accessed and when it is appropriate or inappropriate to do so. And then developers need to react to these changes because let's do the right things for users, right? But sometimes it can be tricky to understand exactly what the right thing is or what the best practices are. So Jeremy Walker has rewritten the codelab that we have for Android location to have more detailed instructions on how to do this stuff and include best practices for the new policy changes that we've had over the last couple of releases. It also includes some support for the new Android 11 restrictions. So if you're getting up to speed on Android 11, you'll want to pay attention to that. And it covers the most common use case, which is actually getting the location when the app is in the foreground, when either the user is using the application or there's at least a foreground notification that gives it that visibility to the user that this is going on. It is not best practice to actually retrieve location while the application is in the background. There are some specific use cases where that is required. So if your application actually does need that use case, then Jeremy also updated the sample that we have to show the best practice for how to do that in the proper way. In the accessibility area, Shaylin Tooley created a couple of code labs to show how to make your application more accessible. So it turns out that if you use the standard widgets in the platform, things like button, then we generally do the right thing for developers, right? So a lot of accessibility capabilities just come for free. It's when you're using custom widgets that you may run into problems. But more importantly, maybe you're running into problems, and if you're not testing for it, then maybe you're not even aware of it. So there are two code labs. One shows you how to identify the problems and then what the generally easy fixes are for those problems. And then the second code lab is about building testing infrastructure. So why go to the trouble of actually making your app accessible if you don't also build in the automatic testing infrastructure that makes sure that your app stays accessible over time with future changes? So the next code lab talks about how to integrate accessibility testing into the existing Espresso tests that you have. And then finally, we've had a couple of ADB podcasts that are posted since the last Now in Android. First of all, there was ADB 136, where it was just a casual chat between me and Romain and Tor. And we talked about the changes that a lot of developers have had over the last few weeks as we've sort of shifted to a working from home full-time thing. So just chatting about, the tools and the techniques that we personally are using and having a conversation, because isn't that what we all should be doing in these work from home times? And then finally, ADB 137 just came out. It's accessibility, strangely enough, and coincidentally, also talking about how to make your apps and apps in general more accessible. We talked to Qasid Sadiq and Sally Yuen from the accessibility team about what their team does, the frameworks that they work on for enabling accessibility and accessibility frameworks and functionality in the platform in general, as well as what app developers can do to address the problems in their apps, to deal with what tends to be sort of a management or organizational issue in making sure that accessibility is a priority. So check those out and check out everything else. As usual, all of this information is linked in the original article on Medium. So check out Now in Android number 16 in the Android Developers publication on Medium. And if you like the video, go ahead and like and share, and then subscribe to the Android Developers channel on YouTube. Thanks.